The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Walker Ranch, a relentless hammer on the anvil of the Texas desert. It cast long, distorted shadows across the dusty landscape, making the familiar seem alien. Thomas Walker, his weathered hands permanently stained with the ghosts of motor oil and earth, was bent over the engine of his old John Deere tractor. At 62, his body ached in places he hadn't known existed a decade ago, but his hands were as steady as ever. He'd learned to do most of the maintenance himself. It saved money he didn't really have, and more importantly, it kept his mind from wandering down paths he couldn't bear to travel. The ranch had been quieter these past 9 years. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a hollow, aching void, an absence with a name: Savannah. He was tightening a fan belt, the rhythmic squeak of the wrench a small, familiar comfort, when he heard the crunch of tires on the long gravel drive. It was a sound he associated with deliveries or, long ago, with trouble. Looking up through the wide open door of the equipment shed, he saw a Brewster County Sheriff's patrol car kicking up a plume of dust as it approached the main house. Thomas grabbed a rag from his back pocket, wiping the grease from his hands with a methodical slowness that belied the sudden knot in his stomach. It had been a long while since law enforcement had come calling about Savannah's case. The first year they'd been a constant, somber presence. By year 3, the visits had trickled to nothing. Thomas walked out to meet them, squinting against the bright high desert sun. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car. One he recognized as Deputy Martinez, a man who had at least tried to look him in the eye during the early days. The other was a younger officer, his face unlined and unfamiliar. "Afternoon, officers," Thomas called out, his voice raspy from the dust and disuse. He kept working the rag between his fingers, a nervous habit he couldn't shake. "What brings you all the way out here?" Deputy Martinez removed his hat, a slow, deliberate gesture that immediately sent a chill down Thomas's spine. That was never a good sign. "Mr. Walker," Martinez began, his tone formal and heavy, "we need to talk to you. We found something." Something? Thomas felt his chest tighten, the air suddenly thick and hard to draw. "We believe," Martinez said, his gaze unwavering. "We found the truck. Your daughter's truck. The one she was using the night she disappeared." A short, sarcastic laugh escaped Thomas's lips before he could stop it. The sound was harsh, brittle. "After 9 years? Where'd you find it?" "At the bottom of the Rio Grande." The officers exchanged a look, and Martinez's expression remained deadly serious. "No, sir. It was buried, deep in the ground, out in the desert just outside the Terlingua ghost town." "Buried?" Thomas shook his head, the word catching in his throat. The heat, the news, it was all making him feel dizzy. "That's impossible. You're telling me someone buried a whole pickup truck?" "An oil drilling crew found it," the younger officer explained, his voice eager to fill the stunned silence. "They were setting up a new drilling station at an old, disused site. When they started drilling to reopen the well, they hit metal. Turned out to be your daughter's Ford." Thomas stared at them, the grease rag falling from his numb fingers to the dusty ground. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. A story from a cheap paperback novel, not his life. But the solemn expressions on the officers' faces told him this was no joke. "I can hardly believe that nonsense," he muttered, but his voice had lost its edge, replaced by a tremor of dawning, terrible reality. "We need you to come with us, Mr. Walker," Martinez said gently. "We need you to identify the truck. Confirm it's the one Savannah was driving. It's evidence now." Thomas nodded slowly, his mind racing, trying to catch up. Let me secure things here." He turned and called out toward a nearby pasture, his voice louder than he intended. "Manuel, His ranch foreman, who'd been mending a fence line, jogged over, his face etched with concern as he took in the scene. "Everything okay, boss?" "They found Savannah's truck," Thomas said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on his tongue. "I've got to go with these officers. I'll be back when I can." Thomas climbed into the back of the patrol car, the vinyl seat hot against his jeans. His mind spun with a vortex of questions, each one sharper and more painful than the last. The drive to the site took nearly an hour and a half, winding through the sparse, beautiful, and cruel desert landscape he knew as well as his own reflection. As they approached Terlingua, he could see the activity from a distance, a cluster of vehicles, the glint of official lights, a crowd of figures dwarfed by the vast emptiness around them. When they arrived, Thomas was struck by the organized chaos. State police cruisers and oil company trucks were parked haphazardly around a perimeter, marked with yellow tape. At the center of it all, suspended by heavy chains from a crane, sat a pickup truck. It was caked in dirt and stained with rust, a grotesque parody of the vehicle he remembered. Behind it gaped a massive raw hole in the earth, the drilling rig standing silent beside it. Thomas stepped out of the car, his legs feeling unsteady on the sandy ground. A man in a suit, his face weary, approached him. "Mr. Walker." It was Detective Rodriguez from the state police, a man who had helmed Savannah's case in the early, frantic days. "I'm sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." Thomas shook his hand, his eyes fixed on the mangled truck. Rodriguez guided him toward a heavy-set man in an oil company hard hat. "This is Jim Patterson from Permian Drilling. Jim, tell Mr. Walker what you told us." Patterson cleared his throat, his gaze sympathetic. "Well, sir, this location was marked on our old surveys as a disused drilling site from the 1960s. When my crew arrived this morning, we noticed a large boulder, maybe a ton or more, sitting right on top of where the old wellhead should have been. That seems strange. Usually old wells are just capped and marked, not covered." Thomas nodded, trying to focus, but his eyes kept drifting to the truck. "We moved the boulder and ran our standard ground-penetrating radar," Patterson continued. "But the old well casing must have interfered with the readings because we didn't detect anything unusual. We started drilling to reopen the well, and about 15 feet down we hit something that wasn't rock or soil. The drill operator knew right away." "So you dug it out?" Thomas asked, his voice a low rasp. "Had to. Took us 3 hours with the excavator, going slow and careful. As soon as we saw it was a vehicle, we called the authorities. I mean, why would anyone dump a truck in an old oil well unless they were trying to hide something awful?" "Someone dumped this here deliberately," Thomas said, his voice tight with a cold, rising anger. "This isn't anywhere near Savannah's usual route. She would have had no reason to be out here." Detective Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We found no human remains in or around the vehicle, but yes, this is clearly a crime scene. Someone went to considerable effort to hide this truck." "Can I see what was inside?" Thomas asked. Rodriguez led him to a provisional tent set up nearby. Under the harsh, sterile light of portable lamps, a folding table displayed a collection of evidence bags, each meticulously labeled. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. Savannah's leather wallet with the distinctive turquoise snap, a simple hair tie with a few strands of her dark hair still wound through it, her small silver cross necklace, the one that had belonged to her mother. "These are hers," Thomas confirmed, his voice rough with unshed tears. He pointed to a grimy multi-tool. "That's mine. I gave it to her for emergencies." His finger moved to a tire pressure gauge. "That's mine too. Told her to keep it in the glove box." A commotion near the site entrance drew their attention. Sheriff Clayton Ridge's SUV pulled up, dust swirling around it. The sheriff emerged, a big man who filled his uniform, adjusting his hat as he surveyed the scene with an air of authority. Detective Rodriguez and Thomas walked over to meet him. "Sorry I'm late," the sheriff said, slightly out of breath. "Got held up at a traffic accident out on Highway 118. 3-car pileup. Had to wait for the state troopers to arrive and take over." "It's okay, Clayton," Rodriguez said. Sheriff Ridge turned to Thomas, his expression softening into one of practiced sympathy. "Thomas, I'm real sorry about all this. I know we searched for 9 years and to finally find something like this." "It's good we found the truck," Thomas said carefully, choosing his words. "But my daughter's still missing. This truck doesn't tell us if she's alive or dead, if she's safe or suffering." He looked at Rodriguez. "What about DNA? Maybe there's something that could tell us what happened." "Forensics has collected everything they could," Rodriguez assured him. "Hair fibers, possible blood samples from the seats, fingerprints if any survived. It'll take a few days at minimum to process." The oil supervisor, Patterson, approached the sheriff. "Sheriff Ridge, can we resume operations in the surrounding area? We've got contracts to fulfill." "No," the sheriff said firmly, his voice booming slightly. "This is a crime scene now. I'm expanding the perimeter. We'll have an excavation team go over this whole area, see if there's anything else buried out here." Rodriguez checked his phone. "I need to head back to the station, review the original case files with this new evidence. I'll drive Thomas home." "I'll take him," Sheriff Ridge offered, placing a heavy hand on Thomas's shoulder. "There's something I need to discuss with him anyway." Thomas looked between the two men, then nodded. He followed the sheriff to his SUV, taking one last look at the truck, his daughter's steel coffin hanging silently against the vast, indifferent sky. The drive back to the ranch was mostly quiet. When they pulled up to the main house, the sheriff cut the engine and turned to Thomas. "Mind if we talk in your office? I need to go over some things with you." Thomas led the way to his small office at the back of the house. The room was his sanctuary, a desk covered in ranch paperwork, a filing cabinet, and walls lined with photos of cattle shows, and, most prominently, a picture of Savannah on her horse, her smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. The sheriff settled into the chair across from the desk, pulling out a small notebook. He clicked his pen a few times before speaking. "Thomas, I need you to walk me through that night again. I know it's been a long time, and the case went cold, but with this new evidence, we need to revisit everything." Thomas leaned back, the old leather of his chair groaning. "I've told this story 100 times, Clayton." "I know, but tell me again." Thomas took a deep breath. Savannah was moving cattle that evening. She usually left around 8 p.m. The drive to the west grazing land takes about 45 minutes. She liked working in the cool of the evening to avoid conflicts with the neighboring ranch over water access. "Go on," the sheriff said, scribbling. "I was here, in this office, finishing paperwork. When she hadn't returned by 11 o'clock, I went to look for her. I found the cattle, but no sign of Savannah or the truck. I wasn't too worried at first." Thomas's voice grew quieter. "She was 28, Clayton, an independent woman who knew this land better than I do. I figured she'd had truck trouble and gotten a ride, or decided to camp out. When I woke up the next morning and she still wasn't here, that's when I called you." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I've lived with that guilt ever since. If I'd called that night..." The sheriff's questions became sharper. "You were alone here? Manuel and the other hands had gone home?" "Yes, they don't live on the property." "Thomas, where exactly were you between 8 p.m. and when you went to look for her?" Thomas frowned. "I told you. I was right here, in this office." "Can anyone verify that?" The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. Why would anyone need to verify that? What time exactly did you go looking for her? And why weren't you worried enough to search more thoroughly or call us immediately? The questions came faster, the sheriff's tone shifting from conversational to interrogatory. Thomas felt a hot flush of anger rise in his neck. "Clayton, what the hell is this? I didn't do anything to my own daughter. Why would I?" "I didn't say you did," the sheriff replied calmly. "But we have to explore all possibilities. In these kinds of cases, sometimes family members are involved." "You're wasting your time," Thomas said, his voice hard as ironwood. "And even if I'd wanted to, which is insane, I'm a 62-year-old man. You think I could bury a truck under 15 feet of desert in one night without anyone noticing, without leaving a single track? What about your ranch staff? Manuel? Where were they that night?" Thomas slammed his hand on the desk, rattling a cup full of pens. "Now you're suspecting my whole damn ranch? Manuel's been with me for 20 years. "I'd like to question them again." "With all due respect, Sheriff." "I don't respect what you're doing right now." Thomas cut him off, leaning forward. "You want to do something useful? Pull the traffic CCTV footage from around Terlingua and Alpine from that night 9 years ago. Look for heavy trucks, excavation equipment, something that could move enough dirt to bury a pickup." Sheriff Ridge shook his head slowly. "At this phase, that's not necessary. I know how to do my job, Thomas." "Do you?" Thomas stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're more interested in pointing fingers at a grieving father than finding who really did this." The sheriff stood as well, closing his notebook with a soft snap. "I'm following procedure." "Then follow it somewhere else. We're done here. If you want to talk to me again, it'll be at the station with Detective Rodriguez present." He walked the sheriff to the door and watched him drive away, fists clenched at his sides. The man who was supposed to be helping him had just treated him like a suspect. The Dusty Spur Tavern was a local institution, opening at 4 p.m. sharp for the ranchers and oil workers coming off their shifts. Thomas pulled into the gravel lot, needing a drink and a moment to think. Inside, the cool, dark air was a blessed relief. He took a seat at the bar. "Whiskey neat, Jake," he said to the bartender. "And whatever sandwich you've got ready." Jake nodded, his expression somber. The local news was on the TV in the corner, showing footage of the drilling site. "Tom, I saw the news. Is that really—" "Please don't ask, Jake." Thomas cut him off. "Just came here to calm down." Jake, understanding, changed the channel. "Hey!" a voice called from a back table. "I was watching that." The man who'd complained got up and moved to the bar, taking a stool one over from Thomas. He was in his mid-40s, with a weary, road-worn look. He kept glancing at the now changed TV. Thomas, feeling a strange kinship with the man's frustration, broke the ice. "You from around here? Don't think I've seen you before." The man turned, seeming grateful for the conversation. "Number just got in. Drove down from New Mexico." He extended a hand. "Barry Granger." "Thomas Walker." "What brings you to Alpine?" Thomas asked. "Looking for my brother, actually. Terry Granger. He's a police officer here. Or was." Thomas nearly choked on his whiskey. "Terry Granger from traffic enforcement?" "That's him." Barry's face lit up with hope. "You know him?" Thomas gestured vaguely toward the TV. "That truck they found, it belonged to me. My daughter was driving it when she disappeared 9 years ago. Terry worked the traffic camera aspect of the case." Barry's expression crumbled. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "It's fine," Thomas said, though it wasn't. "But why are you looking for Terry? I thought—" "That's just it. I can't find him," Barry said, his frustration evident. "I've been here for 2 days, went to the police department, but they told me Terry quit 9 years ago, said he moved to Mexico. Nobody seems to know anything else." 9 years ago, Thomas frowned. The timing, so close to Savannah's disappearance, felt like a cold stone dropping in his gut. "He never mentioned moving to Mexico to you?" We weren't on the best of terms, Barry admitted, staring at his beer. My life was a mess back then. I'm clean now, pulling things together. Wanted to reconnect, but he wouldn't just leave without telling someone. A nagging feeling tugged at Thomas. A cop quitting abruptly right after a major disappearance. A sheriff who wanted to ignore traffic camera evidence. Look, Thomas said, a new resolve hardening in his voice. I need to talk to Detective Rodriguez anyway. After my run-in with the sheriff, I trust him more. Let's go to the station. We'll see what the detective really knows about Terry. At the Alpine police station, they learned Rodriguez was out, but Sheriff Ridge was expected back any minute. As they waited, the sheriff's SUV pulled into the lot. Through the glass doors, they saw him park and remain in his vehicle, talking on the phone. I need to grab my phone charger from my truck anyway, Thomas said, needing a reason to move. He walked across the lot. The sheriff's SUV was parked with its windows cracked for ventilation, and as Thomas passed behind it, he could hear the sheriff's voice, tinny but clear, from the car's speakerphone. Handle it quickly, the sheriff was saying. The bones, yes. Find the bones. Thomas fumbled with his keys, trying to mind his own business. No, I'm not leaving town, the sheriff continued. Then in response to the muffled voice on the other end, not Terry Granger. No one cares. Don't worry, new guy in the office. Yes. Thomas froze. Terry Granger. No one cares. His blood ran cold. The sheriff's engine roared to life, and the SUV began backing out. Get in the car, Thomas said urgently to Barry, who was walking toward him. What? Why? I think I just overheard something I wasn't supposed to. Just get in. They pulled out of the lot, following the sheriff's SUV from a distance. What did you hear? Barry asked, his face pale. Your brother's name? Thomas said, his hands tight on the wheel. The sheriff was talking about Terry Granger. Said no one cares about him. And something about bones. As they tailed the increasingly erratic sheriff, Thomas called Rodriguez and put him on speaker, explaining what he'd heard and what they were doing. Thomas, that's not a good idea, the detective warned. You're following Sheriff Ridge. He's turning, Barry interrupted. They watched the SUV veer onto a dirt road leading to an old, run-down farmhouse. Thomas pulled over, hiding his truck behind a cluster of mesquite trees. In the gathering dusk, they saw another car pull up to the farmhouse. Several men got out, dragged a bound and blindfolded figure from their back seat, and loaded the person into the trunk of the sheriff's SUV. The sheriff never even got out of his vehicle. Call Rodriguez now, Thomas said, his voice a choked whisper. He grabbed the phone. Detective, we just witnessed Sheriff Ridge receive what looks like a kidnapped person. They loaded someone into his trunk at an old farmhouse off Highway 67. Are you absolutely certain? Rodriguez's voice was all business. Four eyes don't lie, Detective, Thomas said grimly. Barry saw it too. I'm issuing a BOLO immediately, Rodriguez said. Units are on their way. Thomas, Barry, turn back now. Let us handle this. If that person in the trunk is my daughter, Thomas said, starting his engine, I'm not letting him go. Just be fast, Detective. He pulled back onto the road, following the sheriff's taillights into the vast, swallowing darkness of the Texas night. They tailed the sheriff through the desolate landscape, Rodriguez on speakerphone coordinating units. Suddenly, the sheriff's brake lights flared, and he veered onto another, rougher road. He changed direction, Barry said. He must have been tipped off about the BOLO. The sheriff's vehicle finally slowed, turning into an abandoned ranch, the silhouettes of a house and stables stark against the sky. They watched as Ridge got out, pulled the limp, bound figure from his trunk, and dragged them into the dark maw of the stables. I have to get closer, Thomas said, his hand on the door handle. No! Barry grabbed his arm. We wait for backup. You heard the detective. This could be a trap. The wait was agonizing. Then, like ghosts, Police vehicles converged on the ranch, lights off, engines silent. Officers swarmed the property surrounding the stable. From inside came muffled shouts, the sound of a struggle, and a woman's cry for help. "Go! Go! Go!" an officer yelled, and they stormed the building. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. Sheriff Ridge was brought out in handcuffs, his face a mask of venomous rage. "You'll regret this, Walker," he snarled. Then officers emerged from the stable, supporting a woman between them. She was thin, frighteningly so, her clothes torn, but even in the poor light, even after 9 years, Thomas knew. "Savannah," he breathed. He ran to her as the medics took over. She was in his arms, her face buried in his neck, her body shaking with sobs. "Dad," she whispered, "I knew you'd find me. I knew you wouldn't give up." The Alpine General Hospital was a sterile, fluorescent world away from the desert's darkness. After Savannah was wheeled away for examination, Thomas found himself in the waiting room, the rage that had been simmering for hours finally boiling over. 9 years of his daughter suffering while that bastard played the concerned lawman. A doctor approached him. "Mr. Walker, I'm Dr. Chen." His expression was grim. "Physically, your daughter is severely malnourished. There's evidence of repeated physical abuse, old fractures that healed improperly, and scarring from restraints. She also has serious infections, likely from prolonged exposure to chemicals. We understand she was kept in a silo where drugs were stored." Thomas sagged against a wall, his legs giving out. "She's stable now," the doctor added quickly, "but recovery will take a very long time." When he was finally allowed to see her, Savannah looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry I didn't come home." "No," Thomas said, taking her fragile hand. "Don't you dare apologize. The only monster here is Clayton Ridge." Near midnight, Detective Rodriguez arrived, looking exhausted but triumphant. Savannah, with a strength that amazed her father, told her story. "I stumbled on a drug deal that night," she explained, her voice gaining power. "Near an old well pad, they saw me. Miguel Salazar. He ran me off the road. He radioed someone saying, 'Sheriff, we have a problem.' Ridge arrived and they argued. Miguel wanted to kill me, but the sheriff, he told them to keep me alive. For him, he told them to bury my truck at that old drilling site outside Terlingua. He said the hole was already there." She described years of being moved between properties, kept in a hidden bunker in a grain silo, a prisoner of the cartel, and a toy for the corrupt sheriff who was supposed to protect her. Rodriguez's face was stone. "Her account matches what Salazar is telling us. He's confessed to everything. He also told us about your brother," he said, looking at Barry, who had arrived and was standing quietly in the doorway. "We found Terry at the farmhouse tonight. He's alive." Barry choked back a sob. "Apparently, Terry grew suspicious of the sheriff 9 years ago," Rodriguez continued. "When he confronted him, Ridge had the cartel take him. They faked his departure to Mexico and forced him to work in their drug labs for 8 years. Rodriguez then showed them a photo on his phone. One more thing. We intercepted Salazar's men tonight at another location. They were burying these. The photo showed fragmented bones mixed with women's clothing and boots, similar to what Savannah wore. They were going to fake your death, Savannah. The plan was to move you across the border while planting this false evidence to make us close the case forever. The bones are from pigs. The weight of how close they had all come to a different, horrific ending settled over the room. Later, in the quiet hospital corridor, Thomas and Barry stood together. Two men, strangers just hours before, now bound by a shared nightmare and a miraculous rescue. "Thank you, Thomas," Barry said, his voice thick with emotion. If we hadn't met, if you hadn't overheard him, I'd never have found Terry. A father doesn't give up on his daughter, Thomas said, looking back toward Savannah's room. And a brother, Barry added, a sad smile touching his lips, doesn't give up on his brother. In the end, that simple truth had been stronger than 9 years of corruption and evil. The scars would last a lifetime for all of them. But Savannah was alive, Terry was free, and in the harsh light of the Texas morning, justice was finally beginning to dawn.